After my wife's death, my sister-in-law invited me to her son's birthday. But when I arrived, she publicly announced that the baby was mine and that she needed half of my $50 million insurance. I asked, "Are you serious?" When she said yes, I couldn't control my laugh because I'm glad to have you here. Follow my story until the end and comment the city you're watching from so I can see how far my story has reached. 6 months. That's how long it had been since I buried my wife Christina, and I still couldn't walk into our bedroom without feeling like the air had been sucked out of my lungs. The house we'd shared for 18 years felt more like a museum now, every corner holding memories that cut deeper than any physical wound. I was sitting in my home office, staring at quarterly reports that might as well have been written in a foreign language when my phone buzzed. Sarah's name appeared on the screen, and I hesitated before answering. Christina's younger sister had been calling more frequently lately, always with some excuse about checking in or making sure I was eating properly. "Tyler, hi." Her voice had that artificially sweet tone I'd grown to recognize over the years. "I hope I'm not bothering you." "No, Sarah, what's up?" "Well, it's Lucas's first birthday next Saturday, and I was hoping you'd come to the party. I know it's been hard for you to be around family lately, but Christina would have wanted you there." The mention of my wife's name hit me like it always did, a sharp pain in my chest that took my breath away. Lucas was Sarah's son, born just 6 months before Christina's cancer took her. My wife had been so excited about becoming an aunt, spending hours knitting blankets and buying toys she'd never see him play with. "I don't know, Sarah. I'm not really in a party mood these days. Please, Tyler, Lucas needs his uncle in his life, and honestly, we all miss Christina too. Being together helps us remember the good times." There was something in her voice, an urgency that seemed out of place for a child's birthday party invitation, but grief had a way of making everything feel off-kilter, so I attributed it to my own emotional state. "Okay, what time?" 2 o'clock, and Tyler, thank you, this means a lot to all of us." After I hung up, I sat back in my leather chair and rubbed my temples. The thought of facing Christina's family felt overwhelming. They'd been supportive during her illness, taking turns at the hospital, bringing casseroles I never ate. But lately, something had shifted. The phone calls felt different, loaded with unspoken expectations I couldn't quite identify. Saturday arrived gray and drizzling, matching my mood perfectly. I dressed in dark jeans and a navy button-down, the closest thing to festive I could manage. The drive to Sarah's house took me through neighborhoods where Christina and I used to walk on Sunday mornings, past the coffee shop where we'd shared countless conversations about our future together. Sarah lived in a modest 2-story house in a subdivision that had seen better days. The lawn needed mowing and the paint was peeling around the window frames. Michael, her husband, worked construction, but had been laid off more often than not lately. I'd offered to help them financially before, but Sarah had always been too proud to accept. I parked behind several cars I recognized from family gatherings and took a deep breath. Through the front window, I could see colorful balloons and the movement of people inside. The sound of children laughing drifted out, a sound that should have been joyful but instead made my chest tighten with the reminder of everything Christina and I would never have. Sarah answered the door before I could knock, almost as if she'd been watching for me. She looked different somehow, nervous energy radiating from her like heat from a fever. Her dark hair was pulled back severely, and she'd applied makeup with a heavy hand that didn't quite hide the dark circles under her eyes. "Tyler, I'm so glad you came." She hugged me tighter than usual, her grip almost desperate. "Everyone's in the living room. Lucas is having such a wonderful time." As we walked through the foyer, I noticed several family members I hadn't expected to see. Christina's mother, Eleanor, sat in the corner with her sister, Margaret. Both women looked up when I entered, their expressions unreadable. Christina's cousin David was there with his wife, and even Uncle Robert had made the trip from 2 states away. "Wow, quite a turnout for a 1-year-old, I said, trying to keep my tone light. "Well, you know how much the family loves any excuse to get together," Sarah replied, but her laugh sounded forced. I made my way around the room, accepting condolences that still felt fresh and raw. Everyone seemed genuinely happy to see me, but there was an undercurrent of tension I couldn't place. conversations seemed to pause when I approached, resuming just a beat too quickly. Eyes followed me as I moved through the room, and I caught whispered exchanges that stopped abruptly when I looked in their direction. Little Lucas sat in his high chair, happily smashing cake into his face with chubby fingers. He was a beautiful child, with dark curls and bright blue eyes that reminded me painfully of Christina. When he saw me, he held out his cake-covered hands and babbled something that might have been "Uncle." "He knows you," Sarah said, appearing at my elbow. "Christina used to show him your picture all the time when she babysat." Something about the way she said it struck me as odd. Christina had been too sick in her final months to babysit anyone. But grief played tricks on memory, and I didn't want to correct what might have been Sarah's way of keeping my wife's memory alive. I was reaching for a piece of cake when Eleanor's voice cut through the room's chatter. "Tyler, dear, come sit with us. We haven't had a proper chance to talk since the funeral." Her tone was kind, but there was something in her eyes that made my stomach clench. I walked over to where she and Margaret sat, both women watching me with an intensity that felt uncomfortable. "How are you holding up, son?" Margaret asked, patting the space beside her on the couch. "Some days are better than others," I said honestly, settling into the offered seat. "And the insurance money? I hope you're managing it wisely. $50 million is quite a responsibility." My blood went cold. The amount of Christina's life insurance policy wasn't something I'd shared with anyone except my attorney and accountant. It wasn't a secret exactly, but it wasn't information I'd volunteered either. "How did you know the exact amount?" I asked carefully. Eleanor and Margaret exchanged a glance that lasted a second too long. "Oh, Christina mentioned it once, I think," Eleanor said vaguely. She was always so practical about financial planning. But Christina had never been one to discuss money with her family. She'd grown up poor and had learned early to keep financial information private. The fact that they knew the precise amount of her policy sent warning bells ringing in my head. I excused myself and walked to the kitchen, needing a moment to process what felt like a growing conspiracy of whispers and knowing looks. Michael was there, opening another case of beer with shaking hands. "Hell of a party," I said, trying to gauge his mood. He looked up, his face flushed either from alcohol or embarrassment. "Yeah, Sarah really went all out." He paused, seeming to struggle with something. "Tyler, I need to tell you something." But before he could continue, Sarah burst through the kitchen door with manic energy. "There you are. We're about to do the birthday song. Lucas's uncle needs to be there for the pictures." She grabbed my arm with a grip that was just shy of painful, pulling me back toward the living room. Michael followed reluctantly, his earlier words left hanging in the air like smoke. As we gathered around Lucas's high chair, I felt the weight of every eye in the room focused on me. The singing was too loud, too forced, and when it ended, the silence that followed felt charged with electricity. That's when I noticed it. The way Sarah's hand rested possessively on Lucas's shoulder, the way Eleanor kept glancing between me and the baby, the way conversations had been steering toward my financial situation all afternoon. And in that moment, standing in that overly warm living room surrounded by people who claimed to love me, I realized that something was terribly, dangerously wrong. The birthday cake sat half-eaten on paper plates, and the afternoon light filtering through the windows had taken on an ominous quality that made my skin crawl. Whatever was coming, I could feel it building like a storm on the horizon, ready to shatter what little peace I'd managed to find in my grief. Just had no idea how devastating the lightning strike would be. The moment arrived with the kind of theatrical timing that only happens in real life when someone has been planning it for weeks. Sarah stood up abruptly, her chair scraping against the hardwood floor with a sound that made everyone's head turn. She smoothed down her dress, a nervous gesture I'd seen her make countless times over the years, but this time it felt rehearsed, practiced. "Before everyone leaves," she announced, her voice carrying across the room with surprising authority, "I have something important to share." My stomach dropped. The room fell silent except for Lucas's happy babbling as he continued to play with his cake. Every face turned toward Sarah, but I felt their eyes shifting to me, measuring my reaction to whatever was about to unfold. "This isn't just a birthday party," Sarah continued, her voice gaining strength. "It's also a celebration of family, and I think it's time everyone knew the truth about Lucas's real father." The words hit the room like a physical blow. I felt my breath catch in my throat as understanding began to dawn. The whispered conversations, the knowing looks, the questions about my insurance money, it had all been leading to this moment. "Sarah, what are you talking about?" Michael's voice was strained, his face pale. Either he was an excellent actor or this was news to him too. Sarah's eyes locked onto mine across the room, and I saw something in them I'd never noticed before. Not just desperation, but calculation. Cold, calculating hunger. "Tyler is Lucas's father," she said simply, as if she were announcing the weather. "We had an affair while Christina was sick. I'm sorry it has to come out this way, but Lucas deserves to know his real daddy, and Tyler needs to take responsibility for his son." The silence that followed was deafening. I could hear my own heartbeat pounding in my ears, feel the heat rising in my face, taste the metallic tang of shock and fury on my tongue. Around the room, family members sat frozen, their expressions ranging from horror to fascination to what looked suspiciously like satisfaction. Then, something unexpected happened. I started to laugh. It began as a low chuckle that built into full-throated laughter that echoed off the walls of Sarah's modest living room. I laughed until tears streamed down my face, until my sides ached, until every person in that room was staring at me like I'd completely lost my mind. "Tyler," Eleanor said sharply, "this is hardly the time for humor." "Oh, but it is," I managed between gasps. "It absolutely is, because this is the most ridiculous thing I've ever heard in my life." Sarah's confident expression faltered slightly. "I know it's a shock, but denying it won't change the facts." "Facts?" I wiped my eyes and looked around the room at Christina's family, these people I'd considered my own family for nearly 2 decades. "The fact is that you're all sitting here believing this garbage without asking a single logical question." "Tyler," Margaret said carefully, "if Sarah says—" "Sarah says a lot of things," I interrupted. "But here's what Sarah doesn't know, what none of you apparently bothered to consider before staging this little intervention." I stood up, feeling steadier than I had in months. The grief that had been weighing me down was still there, but now it was joined by something else. Righteous anger at the betrayal of people I'd trusted. "I had a vasectomy 8 years ago," I said clearly, making sure every person in the room heard me. "It's medically impossible for me to father any children." The effect was immediate and dramatic. Sarah's face went white, then red, then white again. Several family members gasped audibly. Michael looked like he'd been punched in the stomach. That's not," Sarah stammered. "Not what?" I challenged. "Not true? Would you like to see the medical records? I still have them." The room erupted in whispered conversations as the implications sank in. Sarah had just publicly accused me of adultery and demanded financial support for a child that couldn't possibly be mine, in front of Christina's entire family. "You're lying," Sarah said desperately. "You're lying to protect your reputation." "Am I? Then let's do a DNA test. Right now, I'll drive to the lab myself." The color drained from her face completely. We don't need to do that. I know what I know." "What you know," I said, my voice dropping to a dangerous quiet, "is that you need money. What you know is that your husband's been out of work more than he's been employed for the past 2 years. What you know is that you've been struggling to keep this house, struggling to pay your bills, struggling to maintain any kind of decent life." Each word hit her like a slap. Around the room, family members were starting to look uncomfortable, shifting in their seats as they realized they'd been pulled into something uglier than they'd bargained for. "That doesn't mean," Eleanor started. "It means," I continued, that someone looked at my wife's life insurance payout and saw an opportunity. Someone decided that $50 million was worth destroying whatever relationship we might have had left." Tyler, please. Sarah's voice cracked. Think about Lucas. Even if you're not his biological father, Christina loved him like he was her nephew. She would have wanted you to help take care of him. And there it was. The emotional manipulation disguised as honoring my dead wife's memory, using Christina's love against me, twisting it into a weapon to pry open my wallet. Don't, I said, my voice like ice. Don't you dare use my wife's name to justify this con job. Michael stood up suddenly, his face flushed with anger and humiliation. Sarah, what the hell is going on here? Is Tyler the father or not? Sarah's mouth opened and closed like a fish gasping for air. The confident woman who'd orchestrated this confrontation had disappeared, leaving behind someone who looked small and cornered and desperate. The timing, it could have been, she stammered. No, I said firmly. It couldn't have been. Because I love my wife, because I never cheated on her, and because it's medically impossible for me to father children. The room fell silent again, but this time the silence felt different. Where before it had been charged with anticipation, now it was heavy, with shame and disappointment. Family members who had been ready to condemn me for adultery were now looking at Sarah with suspicion and disgust. How could you do this? Michael's voice was barely above a whisper. How could you humiliate our family like this? I was desperate, Sarah said, tears starting to flow. We're going to lose the house. The credit cards are maxed out. I thought if Tyler could just help us. By lying? By accusing him of adultery? By trying to destroy his memory of Christina? I watched this family implosion with a mixture of satisfaction and sadness. These were people I'd cared about, people who had supported Christina and me through her illness. But they'd also just sat here, ready to believe the worst about me based on nothing more than Sarah's desperate lies. Tyler, Eleanor said quietly, we owe you an apology. Do you? I asked. Or did you all know exactly what Sarah was planning to say today? The uncomfortable shifting in the room told me everything I needed to know. This hadn't been Sarah acting alone. This had been a coordinated effort, a family meeting where they'd discussed my finances and decided I owed them something. I walked over to Lucas's high chair where the innocent baby continued to play with his toys, oblivious to the drama unfolding around him. He looked up at me with bright, trusting eyes, and for a moment my heart clenched with genuine affection for this child who had become a pawn in his mother's scheme. Lucas deserves better than this, I said quietly. He deserves a mother who doesn't use him as bait for con jobs. Sarah's sobs grew louder, but I felt no sympathy for her tears. She'd been willing to destroy my reputation, my memory of Christina, and her own son's future for money she had no right to claim. I headed toward the door, ignoring the calls from various family members who suddenly wanted to explain or apologize or make excuses. But as I reached for the handle, Sarah's voice stopped me cold. Wait, she called out desperately. There's something else, something about Christina that you don't know. I turned, slowly, seeing something in her eyes that made my blood run cold. Whatever she was about to say, I had the terrible feeling that this afternoon was far from over. And somewhere in the back of my mind a small voice whispered that maybe, just maybe, I didn't know my late wife as well as I thought I did. Sarah's words hung in the air like poison gas, and I felt something cold settle in my chest. The way she said something about Christina with that desperate, calculating look in her eyes made every instinct I had scream danger. What are you talking about? I asked quietly, but I didn't move back into the room. Whatever bomb she was about to drop, I wanted to be near an exit. Christina knew, Sarah said, her voice gaining strength as she saw she had my attention. She knew about us, about what happened between us. The room went completely silent. Even Lucas stopped babbling, as if sensing the tension that had descended like a suffocating blanket over his first birthday party. There was no us, I said firmly. There was no what happened. You're digging yourself deeper into a hole that you can't climb out of. She confronted me, Sarah continued, tears streaming down her face. Right before she went into the hospital for the last time, She said she knew about the affair, about Lucas being yours. She was going to change her will, Tyler. She was going to leave everything to charity instead of you." I felt the words hit me, like physical blows. Christina, dying and believing I had betrayed her with her own sister. Christina, spending her final weeks thinking the man she'd loved for 18 years had cheated on her when she was most vulnerable. "You're lying," I whispered, but my voice lacked conviction. Not because I believed her story about an affair, but because the cruelty of what she was suggesting felt so monstrous that it momentarily stole my breath. "Am I?" Sarah's confidence was returning as she saw the effect her words were having. "Ask Dr. Martinez about the vasectomy, Tyler. Ask him when exactly you had it done." My blood turned to ice. Dr. Martinez had been Christina's oncologist, but he was also a family friend who had recommended the urologist who performed my procedure. The fact that Sarah knew his name, knew he was connected to my vasectomy, meant she had done research. Real research. "What does Dr. Martinez have to do with anything?" "Because," Sarah said with vicious satisfaction, "Christina asked him about vasectomies, about whether they could fail, about whether a man could still father children years later." The room spun around me. I gripped the doorframe to steady myself as the implications hit home. If Christina had asked those questions, it meant she really had suspected something. It meant my dying wife had spent her final weeks believing I had betrayed her. "You told her," I said, the realization hitting me like a sledgehammer. "You told her we had an affair. You let her die thinking I cheated on her." "I had to," Sarah screamed. "She was going to change the will. She was going to leave you with nothing." "So you tortured a dying woman to protect money I never even knew existed?" The confession hung in the air, damning and complete. Sarah had just admitted to psychologically torturing my wife in her final weeks for the chance at an inheritance that didn't even exist at that point. Michael stood up slowly, his face pale with disgust. "Sarah, tell me you didn't do what I think you did." "I was protecting our family," Sarah said desperately. "Our son's future. I thought if Christina believed Tyler had cheated, she'd leave the money to family instead." "Our son?" Michael's voice was dangerously quiet. "Tyler just proved he can't be the father. So whose son is Lucas really, Sarah?" The question hung in the air like a time bomb. Sarah's face went through a series of expressions, panic, calculation, resignation, before settling on something that looked almost relieved. "It doesn't matter," she said finally. "What matters is that Tyler has $50 million and we have nothing." "It matters to me," Michael said. "It matters a hell of a lot to me." I watched this family drama unfold with a mixture of horror and fascination. In the space of an hour, Sarah had destroyed her marriage, revealed herself as a manipulative liar, and admitted to torturing my dying wife. But there was something else in her desperation, something that told me this went deeper than simple greed. "Who is he?" I asked quietly. Sarah's eyes darted around the room, looking for support that was no longer there. The family members who had been ready to take her side an hour ago were now staring at her with disgust and disappointment. "It's not important," she repeated. "The hell it's not," Michael exploded. "I've been raising another man's child for a year, thinking he was mine. Who is the father, Sarah?" "Someone who can't acknowledge him," Sarah said finally. "Someone who's married, someone who could never be in Lucas's life anyway." The pieces were starting to come together in my mind. A married man who couldn't acknowledge his son, Sarah's desperate need for money, the timing of Lucas's birth just months before Christina's death. "He's wealthy, isn't he?" I said. "The real father. He's wealthy and he's married and he can never publicly claim Lucas." Sarah's silence was confirmation enough. "So you decided I would make a convenient replacement father, someone with money and no family of my own to complicate things." "Tyler, please," Eleanor interrupted. "Maybe we could all just calm down and discuss this rationally." I turned to look at Christina's mother, this woman who had helped raise my wife, who had been like a mother to me for 18 years. "Were you part of this?" I asked. Her hesitation was answer enough. "We just thought," Margaret began. That family should take care of family, that you might want to help with Lucas since Christina cared so much about him. By lying? By accusing me of adultery? By letting Sarah torture Christina in her final weeks? We didn't know about that part, Eleanor said quickly, but I was done listening to excuses and justifications. These people had sat in this room ready to destroy my reputation and extort money from me based on lies they had helped orchestrate. The only thing they hadn't counted on was my vasectomy. Here's what's going to happen, I said, my voice steady and cold. I'm going to leave this house and I'm never going to see any of you again. I'm going to honor Christina's memory by living the life she would have wanted me to live, which doesn't include being ATM machine for her lying, manipulative family. Tyler, wait, David spoke up for the first time. Don't let Sarah's mistakes destroy our whole relationship. Some of us had nothing to do with this. I looked around the room at faces I'd known for decades, Christina's family, who had been my family too, but I saw them clearly now for what they were. People who viewed me as a source of money first and a person second. Didn't you? I asked. Then why is everyone here? Why is Uncle Robert here from 3 states away for a 1-year-old's birthday party? Why are you all here on the same day that Sarah decided to make her big announcement? The uncomfortable shifting told me everything I needed to know. This had been planned, coordinated, rehearsed. They had all known what Sarah was going to say, had all been prepared to support her claim in exchange for what they hoped would be a piece of $50 million. I walked over to Lucas one more time. The baby looked up at me with those bright blue eyes, and I felt a stab of genuine sadness. Not for Sarah, not for the family that had betrayed me, but for this innocent child who would grow up learning that his mother had tried to sell him to the highest bidder. "I'm sorry, little guy," I whispered. "You deserve so much better than this." Then I walked out of that house and into the gray September afternoon, feeling like I was emerging from a toxic fog that had been choking me for months without my realizing it. But as I drove away, Sarah's words about Christina echoed in my mind. Had my wife really spent her final weeks believing I had betrayed her? Had she died thinking the love of her life was a lie? I needed answers, and I knew exactly where to find them. Dr. Martinez had been more than Christina's doctor. He'd been our friend. If anyone knew what Christina had been thinking in her final weeks, it would be him. As I pulled into the hospital parking lot, I couldn't shake the feeling that I was about to learn something that would change everything I thought I knew about my marriage, my wife, and the woman I'd just escaped from. The truth, I was beginning to realize, was going to be more complicated than either Sarah's lies or my own assumptions, and somehow that terrified me more than anything that had happened at the party. Dr. Martinez looked older than I remembered as he sat across from me in his office, his hands folded on the desk between us. The fluorescent lights cast harsh shadows across his face, making the lines around his eyes more pronounced. He'd aged in the 6 months since Christina's funeral, and I suspected I had too. "Tyler, I'm glad you came to see me," he said, quietly. "I've been thinking about calling you for weeks." My stomach dropped. "About what Christina asked you? About the vasectomy?" He nodded slowly, his expression grave. "She did ask me about it, but not for the reasons you might think." I leaned forward, my heart pounding. "What do you mean?" "Christina knew about your vasectomy, Tyler. She knew it was medically impossible for you to father children. That's why she came to me with questions." The words hit me like a physical blow. "I don't understand. If she knew I couldn't be the father, then why did Sarah say—" "Because Sarah told Christina that Lucas was your son," Dr. Martinez interrupted, "and Christina knew immediately that it was a lie." The room spun around me as the implications sank in. Christina hadn't died believing I cheated on her. She'd died knowing that her sister was a liar. "Sarah came to Christina about 3 weeks before her final hospitalization," Dr. Martinez continued. "She claimed you had been having an affair, that Lucas was your child, and that Christina should change her will to provide for the baby." "And Christina didn't believe her?" "Christina laughed in her face," Dr. Martinez said with a sad smile. "She told Sarah that she knew about your vasectomy, knew it was impossible, and that she was disgusted by the attempt to manipulate her when she was dying." Relief flooded through me so powerfully that I felt dizzy. Christina had known, she had trusted me. She had died knowing that our love was real and unbroken, but the relief was quickly replaced by a burning rage at what Sarah had tried to do. "So why did Christina ask you about vasectomies failing?" Dr. Martinez hesitated, and I saw something troubling cross his expression. "Because she wanted to understand something about Sarah's situation. She was trying to figure out who the real father was." "Did she figure it out?" "She had her suspicions." He paused, seeming to weigh his words carefully. "Tyler, what I'm about to tell you could be very damaging to several people. Are you sure you want to know?" "After what happened today? Yes. I need to know everything." Dr. Martinez opened his desk drawer and pulled out a sealed envelope with my name written on it in Christina's handwriting. "She asked me to give you this if Sarah ever came after you for money," he said. "She said you'd know when the time was right." My hands shook as I took the envelope. Christina's handwriting, her final words to me about something she'd known would happen after her death. She knew Sarah would do this. Christina knew her sister better than anyone. She knew Sarah was desperate for money, knew she was capable of manipulation, and she knew that with $50 million at stake, Sarah wouldn't be able to resist taking a shot at it. I stared at the envelope, afraid to open it but knowing I had to. "Dr. Martinez, who did Christina think was Lucas's real father?" He was quiet for a long moment, and when he spoke, his voice was barely above a whisper. "Have you ever wondered why Eleanor and Margaret knew the exact amount of your insurance policy?" My blood went cold. "What are you saying?" "I'm saying that Christina discovered something in her final weeks that shocked her to her core. Something about her own family that made her realize Sarah's desperation went deeper than simple financial trouble. Tell me. The real father of Lucas is married, wealthy, and someone who could never publicly acknowledge the child," Dr. Martinez said carefully. "Someone who has been giving Sarah money to keep quiet but not enough to solve her problems permanently." The pieces were starting to click into place in my mind, forming a picture so ugly I didn't want to see it clearly. "Someone in the family," I said. Dr. Martinez nodded grimly. "Christina found text messages on Sarah's phone when she was visiting one day, messages that made it very clear who Lucas's father really is and why Sarah is so desperate for money." "Who?" "Read the letter, Tyler. Christina explains everything." With trembling fingers, I opened the envelope and unfolded 2 pages of Christina's neat handwriting. As I read, I felt my understanding of the past year shift and realign into something far more sinister than I could have imagined. "My dearest Tyler, if you're reading this, then Sarah has done exactly what I knew she would do. She's tried to convince you that Lucas is your son, and she's probably gathered the family to pressure you into supporting her claim. I need you to know several things. First, I never doubted you for a second. I know about your vasectomy. I know you would never cheat on me, and I know that our love was real and true until my very last breath. Second, Sarah is not just desperate for money, she's being blackmailed. The real father of Lucas is David. My cousin David, who has been married to Janet for 15 years and who serves on the board of directors for 3 major corporations. He's worth approximately $12 million, but he could lose everything, his marriage, his children, his career, if his affair with Sarah came to light. He's been giving Sarah $5,000 a month to keep quiet, but it's not enough to cover her debts and lifestyle. She needs a bigger score, and your insurance money looks like the perfect solution. But here's the part that breaks my heart, Tyler. The family knows. Eleanor knows. Margaret knows. Even Uncle Robert knows. They've all been covering for David, helping him keep his secret, and they see your money as a way to solve the problem permanently. They've turned my baby nephew into a commodity, a tool to extract money from the man I love. They've convinced themselves that you owe the family something because you'll inherit my insurance money. I want you to know that I changed my will 3 days before I died. Not to leave the money to charity, as Sarah probably threatened, but to protect you. The money is yours absolutely, with one condition. You must cut ties with my family completely if they try to manipulate you after my death. I know this seems harsh, but I've seen what they're capable of. They sat in my living room, planning how to get their hands on your money while I was upstairs dying. They talked about you like you were a resource to be harvested, not a person who was grieving. I need you to be free of them, Tyler. I need you to live your life without the weight of their expectations and manipulations. Take the money and build something beautiful, travel, find love again. Do all the things we dreamed of doing together. Don't let them guilt you with memories of me. I want you to remember our love is pure and untainted by their greed. The evidence you need is in our safe deposit box. David's text messages to Sarah, financial records showing his payments to her, even a DNA test he had done privately. I gathered it all before I died. I love you forever, Christina. P.S. Lucas is innocent in all of this. If you can find a way to help him without enabling Sarah's manipulation, please do. He deserves better than the family he was born into. I sat in stunned silence, the letter trembling in my hands. David, Christina's cousin, who I'd considered a friend, a man who had sat in my living room, eaten my food, comforted me at Christina's funeral, all while knowing he was the father of the child his sister-in-law was trying to pin on me. She gave you copies of everything? I asked Dr. Martinez. He nodded. It's all in a sealed file in the hospital's secure storage. She wanted to make sure Sarah couldn't destroy the evidence. I thought back to the party, to David's reluctant participation in the confrontation. He hadn't spoken up when Sarah made her accusation, but he also hadn't piled on like the others. Now I knew why. He was caught between protecting his own secret and watching an innocent man be destroyed. "What are you going to do?" Dr. Martinez asked. I folded the letter carefully and put it back in the envelope. For the first time in months, I felt clear-headed and purposeful. Christina had given me everything I needed to protect myself and expose the truth. "I'm going to honor my wife's wishes," I said. "I'm going to cut ties with her family permanently." "And David? Lucas?" I thought about the innocent baby who was being used as a pawn in this ugly game, and about the man who had fathered him but was too cowardly to claim him. "Lucas deserves to know his real father," I said, "and David deserves to face the consequences of his choices." As I left the hospital, I felt something I hadn't experienced in months. Peace. Not the kind that comes from winning a battle, but the kind that comes from understanding the truth. Christina had protected me even after death, had seen through her family's manipulation, and given me the tools to escape it. But there was one more thing I needed to do. One final confrontation that would put this ugly chapter behind me forever and ensure that Sarah could never try this again with anyone else. I pulled out my phone and sent a single text to David. "We need to talk. Tomorrow at 10 a.m., Christina's grave. Come alone or I go to Janet with everything." Then I drove home to the house Christina and I had shared, no longer feeling like it was a museum of memories, but like it was exactly what it had always been. A sanctuary where love had lived and where it would always be remembered honestly. The war wasn't over yet, but the next battle would be fought on my terms, with my wife's wisdom guiding me and her love protecting me from the lies that had almost destroyed us both. The cemetery was wrapped in morning mist when I arrived at Christina's grave, the September air crisp with the promise of autumn. I'd come early, needing time alone with my wife before the confrontation that would end this nightmare once and for all. Her headstone was simple, elegant, exactly what she would have wanted. "Christina Marie Hendricks, beloved wife, forever in our hearts." I'd chosen those words during the fog of grief, never imagining how prophetic they would become. "I found your letter," I said quietly, placing fresh white roses on her grave. "You saved me, even after you were gone. You always were the smartest one in the family." The irony wasn't lost on me, that I was about to confront her cousin here, in this place where her body rested. But somehow it felt right. Christina had orchestrated this final revelation, and she deserved to be here for it. David arrived exactly at 10, his expensive sedan crunching over the gravel path. He looked terrible, pale, unshaven, his usual confident demeanor replaced by the haunted look of a man whose secrets were about to destroy his life. "Tyler," he said as he approached, his voice hoarse, "I'm sorry it's come to this." "Are you? Or are you just sorry you got caught?" He stopped about 10 feet away from me, his hands shoved deep in his coat pockets. Both, I suppose. I studied his face, looking for some sign of the man I'd thought I knew. David had been at my wedding, had been a pallbearer at Christina's funeral, had shaken my hand and called me brother, all while carrying this poisonous secret. "How long?" I asked. "The affair?" "About 2 years. It started when Michael lost his job the first time. Sarah was vulnerable." Vulnerable. I let the word hang in the air. "Is that what you call someone whose husband is struggling to find work? Vulnerable?" David flinched but didn't defend himself. "It was wrong. I know it was wrong." "Wrong doesn't begin to cover it. You destroyed your marriage, your family, Sarah's marriage, and almost destroyed mine. All for what? Sex with your cousin's sister-in-law?" "It wasn't like that," David said weakly. "We had feelings for each other." "Feelings?" I laughed bitterly. "Did those feelings include letting her try to pin your son on me? Did those feelings include watching her accuse me of adultery in front of my dead wife's family?" David's face crumpled. "I never wanted it to go that far. I told Sarah not to involve you. But you didn't stop her, did you? You sat there yesterday and watched her try to destroy my reputation rather than own up to your own mess." "My marriage." "Your marriage is over anyway," I cut him off. "The only question is whether it ends with you being honest or with me showing Janet the evidence Christina collected." David's face went white. "What evidence?" I pulled out my phone and scrolled to the photos I'd taken of the documents from Christina's safe deposit box that morning. Text messages between David and Sarah discussing the pregnancy, discussing money, discussing how to keep Janet from finding out. Bank records showing monthly payments from David's personal account to Sarah's. Even a DNA test David had secretly arranged confirming his paternity. "She documented everything," I said, showing him the screen. "Every lie, every payment, every secret meeting. Christina was smarter than both of you combined." David sank to his knees on the wet grass, his carefully constructed life crashing down around him. "Oh God, Christina knew. She knew you were Lucas's father. She knew you were paying Sarah to keep quiet. She knew the whole family was planning to come after my insurance money to solve your problem." "I never asked them to do that," David said desperately. "I never wanted them involved." "But you didn't stop them either. You let them believe your lie about me being the father. You let them think they could shake me down for money that would solve everyone's problems." I looked down at him kneeling beside my wife's grave, and I felt something I hadn't expected. Pity. Not enough to forgive him, but enough to understand how a moment of weakness had spiraled into this catastrophe. "How much have you given Sarah?" "About $60,000 over the past year," David admitted. $5,000 a month. "And it wasn't enough." "It's never enough. Her debts keep growing. Michael's unemployment benefits ran out. They're behind on the mortgage, the car payments, everything. So she decided $50 million would solve the problem permanently." David nodded miserably. "She said if you believed Lucas was yours, you'd want to take care of him, that you had more money than you could ever spend anyway." "And you believed that was acceptable? That I should pay for your son because you're too cowardly to claim him?" "I was scared," David whispered. "Scared of losing my family, my job, everything I've worked for." "Well, you're going to lose it anyway now. The only question is how." I crouched down so we were at eye level. "Here's what's going to happen. You're going to go home and tell Janet the truth, all of it, about the affair, about Lucas, about the money you've been secretly paying Sarah." "Tyler, please." "I'm not finished. You're also going to establish a trust fund for Lucas. Not a few $1,000s here and there, but enough to secure his future. College, health care, everything a father should provide." David's eyes widened. "I can't afford—" "You can't afford not to. Because if you don't take responsibility for your son, I'll make sure everyone knows what kind of man you really are. Your business partners, your clients, your board positions, everyone will know that you abandoned your child and tried to frame an innocent man." The threat hung in the air between us. David stared at me with the look of a man watching his world collapse. "There's more," I continued. "You're going to make sure Sarah understands that this ends here. No more schemes, no more manipulation, no more coming after me or anyone else for money she doesn't deserve. If she wants support for Lucas, she deals with you directly. And if I do all this? Then this stays between us and the people who already know. Janet will leave you, but at least she'll know the truth instead of living a lie. Your children will know their half-brother exists, and Lucas will grow up knowing who his real father is. David was crying now, the weight of his choices finally crushing down on him. "I'm sorry," he whispered. "I'm so sorry about all of this." "Don't apologize to me," I said, standing up. "Apologize to Christina. Apologize to your wife. Apologize to your son who's going to grow up knowing his father was too ashamed to claim him." I walked back to Christina's grave and placed my hand on her headstone. "Your family showed their true colors, sweetheart, but you already knew they would." David struggled to his feet, looking like he'd aged 10 years in the past hour. "What about you? What are you going to do?" "I'm going to honor Christina's wishes," I said simply. "I'm going to cut ties with your toxic family and live the life she wanted me to live. The money is mine, legally and morally. Christina earned it through years of work, and she chose to leave it to me. Your family will never see a penny of it." David nodded slowly, accepting his fate. "For what it's worth, Christina was the best person in our family. She deserved better than all of us." "Yes, she did, and she knew it." As David walked away, shoulders slumped in defeat, I felt the final pieces of this ugly puzzle fall into place. Christina had seen it all coming, had protected me from beyond the grave, and had given me everything I needed to escape the web of lies and manipulation that had entangled our families. I spent another hour at her grave, telling her about the confrontation, about Sarah's public humiliation, about the family she'd been wise enough to see clearly. The morning mist had burned off, leaving the cemetery bathed in golden sunlight that made everything feel clean and new. "I'm going to be okay," I promised her. "I'm going to be free." As I walked back to my car, I felt lighter than I had in months. The grief was still there, would always be there, but it was no longer tangled up with guilt, confusion, and the weight of other people's expectations. My phone buzzed with a text from Sarah. "David told me what you know. This isn't over." I deleted the message without responding. It was over, whether Sarah accepted it or not. I had the truth, I had the evidence, and I had something even more powerful: the knowledge that my wife had loved and trusted me until the very end. The war was over, and I had won by refusing to fight on their terms. Now it was time to start living again, on mine. 3 months later, I stood in the living room of my new home, watching the sunrise paint the mountains outside my window in shades of gold and pink. The house in Colorado was nothing like the one Christina and I had shared. Smaller, simpler, perched on a hillside with views that stretched for miles. It was exactly what I needed. A place where memories could be treasured without being overwhelming. The silence here was different from the suffocating quiet that had filled my old house after Christina's death. This was peaceful silence, the kind that comes from being truly alone by choice, rather than abandoned by circumstance. My phone had been mercifully quiet since I'd changed my number and moved. No more desperate calls from Sarah, no more guilty texts from family members trying to rebuild bridges I'd deliberately burned. The legal papers I'd had served made it clear that any attempt to contact me would result in harassment charges, and apparently even Sarah wasn't desperate enough to test that boundary. I'd heard through my lawyer that David had followed through on his promises. He'd told Janet everything, and she'd filed for divorce within a week. He'd also established a trust fund for Lucas, though it had cost him most of his liquid assets. His business partners had quietly pushed him out when word of the affair spread, but at least he was finally taking responsibility for his son. Sarah had moved back in with her parents after Michael kicked her out. The house had been foreclosed on, and she was working as a waitress while fighting for custody of Lucas. According to my lawyer, she'd tried to take David to court for more money, but the evidence of her blackmail attempts had made her legal position untenable. I felt no satisfaction in their downfall, only relief that it was over. The sound of tires on gravel interrupted my morning contemplation. I wasn't expecting anyone, and for a moment I felt a flicker of the old paranoia. But when I looked out the window, I saw Dr. Martinez climbing out of a rental car, looking around at the mountain landscape with obvious appreciation. I opened the door before he could knock. "This is a surprise." "I hope you don't mind," he said with a slight smile. "I had a conference in Denver, and I thought I'd drive up to see how you're doing. Come in, coffee's fresh." He followed me into the kitchen, accepting a mug with grateful hands. The morning air at 8,000 feet had a bite that took some getting used to. "This is beautiful, Tyler. Christina would have loved it." I nodded, looking out at the view that had sold me on the house the moment I'd seen it. She always talked about wanting to live in the mountains, said she wanted to wake up above the clouds. And now you do. Now I do. We sat in comfortable silence for a while, drinking coffee and watching the sun climb higher over the peaks. Finally, Dr. Martinez spoke. "I brought something for you," he said, pulling an envelope from his jacket pocket. "Christina asked me to give you this after you'd had time to heal." My hands trembled slightly as I took the envelope. My name was written on it in Christina's handwriting, but below it were the words, "For when you're ready to live again." "How did you know I was ready?" Dr. Martinez smiled. "Because you moved to the mountains, because you're building something new instead of hiding in the ashes of something old. Because you look like Tyler again, not like a ghost haunting Tyler's life." I opened the envelope carefully. Inside was a single sheet of paper and a small key. "My darling Tyler, if you're reading this, it means you've survived my family's attempt to destroy you and you've found the strength to start living again. I'm so proud of you." The key opens a safe deposit box at First National Bank in Denver, box number 473. Inside, you'll find something I've been saving for the day when you'd be ready to think about the future instead of just surviving the present. I want you to know that watching you grieve for me has been the hardest part of dying. Not the pain, not the fear, but knowing that I was leaving you alone to face a world that would try to take advantage of your generous heart. You gave me 18 years of perfect love, Tyler. You made every day of my life better just by being in it. Now I want you to take that capacity for love and share it with someone who deserves it. I'm not asking you to forget me or replace me. I'm asking you to honor what we had by believing in love again. Find someone who makes you laugh the way I did. Find someone who challenges you and supports you and sees the beautiful man I fell in love with all those years ago. The money in that box is yours to use however you want, but I hope you'll use some of it to travel. See the places we talked about seeing together. Stand in front of the northern lights. Walk along the beaches of New Zealand. Climb mountains that make you feel close to heaven. Live the adventure we planned, even if you have to live it alone at first. But don't stay alone forever, my love. The world needs what you have to offer, and you need what the world has to offer you. I love you forever and always, Christina P.S. I've left instructions with Dr. Martinez to check on you periodically, not to interfere, just to make sure you're not disappearing into grief the way I worried you might. Trust him to know when you need a push toward life." I looked up to find Dr. Martinez watching me with kind eyes. "She planned all of this?" "Christina was a remarkable woman. She knew you better than you knew yourself, and she knew exactly what you'd need to heal." "What's in the box?" "I don't know," he admitted. "She set it up independently, but she told me it was enough to fund whatever adventure called to you." I thought about the woman who had loved me enough to orchestrate my salvation from beyond the grave, who had protected me from her own family's greed and given me the tools to build a new life. "She was right about one thing," I said finally. "I am ready to start living again." Dr. Martinez smiled. "What does that look like?" I looked around the house I'd bought, at the mountains that stretched endlessly outside my windows, at the life I was building one careful piece at a time. "I don't know yet, but for the first time since she died, I'm excited to find out." That afternoon, I drove to Denver and opened Christina's final gift to me. Inside the safe deposit box was a cashier's check for $250,000 and a travel journal she'd started for both of us, filled with pictures and plans for all the places we'd dreamed of visiting together. The last entry was in her handwriting. For Tyler. Go everywhere we talked about going. Take pictures for both of us. Live enough life for two people until you find someone to share it with. I closed the journal and looked around the sterile bank room where my wife had arranged my liberation. She'd given me money, freedom, and most importantly, permission to be happy again. That night, I sat in my new living room with travel brochures spread across the coffee table. New Zealand beckoned with its mountains and beaches. Iceland promised northern lights dancing across winter skies. Scotland offered castles and landscapes that looked like something from a fairy tale. For the first time in months, I felt excited about tomorrow instead of just resigned to it. I picked up my phone and booked a flight to Auckland, leaving in 2 weeks. It would be my first real vacation in 5 years, my first solo adventure since college, my first step into a future that belonged entirely to me. As I fell asleep that night in my mountain house, I thought about Christina and how she'd managed to save me from a family that would have consumed me with their neediness and manipulation. She'd seen the trap they were setting and had given me everything I needed to escape it. But more than that, she'd given me permission to live again. Permission to love again. Permission to build something beautiful from the ashes of our beautiful life together. Sarah and her schemes felt like someone else's nightmare now, something that had happened to a different version of myself. The man who had been manipulated and lied to and nearly destroyed by greed disguised as family obligation was gone. In his place was someone stronger, wiser, and finally free to discover who he could become when he wasn't carrying the weight of other people's expectations and entitlement. I was Tyler again, but better. Tyler plus 18 years of love, plus hard-earned wisdom about the difference between family and parasites, plus the mountaintop perspective that comes from surviving something that should have destroyed you. Tomorrow would bring new possibilities, new adventures, and eventually new love. But tonight I was simply grateful to be alive, to be free, and to have been loved by a woman wise enough to protect me even after she was gone. The war was over, and I hadn't just survived it. I'd learned to live again.